Baseball betting is one of the hardest markets to beat, not because there's no edge, but because most bettors are looking in the wrong places. They're chasing picks, riding hot streaks, following narratives, while the real edge is sitting in the data, the market, and the process. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what actually matters in MLB betting, from building power ratings to identifying value in the market to creating a repeatable system that gives you a real shot at plus EV. Because in baseball, it's not about being right on one game, it's about making the right decisions over a very long season. Let's start here. The MLB betting market is very different from other sports, right? This is a high volume data driven market, but it's not fully efficient. And that's going to be important, right? Because inefficiencies are where we make the money. Now, here's what separates baseball from everything else. You've got 162 games per team over about 2,400 games in one season, which means there's more variance and there's also more opportunity. But it also means that if you don't have structure and discipline, you can lose fast. So remember, this is a daily grind market. You're not showing up once a week like the NFL, you're making decisions almost every day. And at the core of every MLB bet, it really comes down to three things. It's going to be the daily change that come with starting pitching, bullpens, and lineups. If you understand those three components better than the average bettor, then you'll be in a better position to grow your MLB bankroll. So if you're looking for a real MLB betting education and want to see more content centered around baseball, hit that like button. It's going to show us that where to keep building and what to throw away when it comes to our content. How do we actually find an edge in baseball? Well, it's going to come down to your research process. And there are three ways to break down any game. You have market analysis, technical analysis, and then fundamental analysis. And market analysis is what the sportsbook and the public are doing, right? Line movement, betting splits, reaction to pitch and news. Then you have your technical analysis. There's going to be your data, your stats, your models, even your projections. This is where you're building your edge. And then finally, you have your fundamental analysis. It's kind of like that real world context. You have matchups, weather, travel. It's what's actually happening that day. Now, here's the key with MLB. Market analysis still matters, but it's not the dominant factor like it is in the NFL or the NBA. Because baseball reacts fast to news. Like starting pitches, they get announced, the line moves. Lineups drop, the line moves. A bullpen arm has been made available. You guessed it, the line moves. So instead of trying to chase the market, your real edge is going to come from this: pitching in lineups and the data that goes along with them. And I'll say this clearly: data is going to carry most of the weight in your research process. Because of the volume in baseball, you're thinking about 162 games for each team, thousands of matchups overall, you're getting massive sample sizes. And those sample sizes are what allow you to actually find real, repeatable edges. Okay, now let's talk about how you're actually betting the game, because this is where a lot of people get tripped up. Baseball, it's a money line sport. Okay, you're not really dealing with spreads like other sports. You're picking winners, favorites versus underdogs. This is usually the core of MLB betting, and it's where you're going to see the large market. Now, you also have the run line. Think about -1.5, maybe +1.5. Favorites can give you better value here, but you need them to win by a margin, whereas the underdogs give you a little bit of cushion, but you're paying a little extra juice. Then you got totals. So totals, those are your overs, your unders. These are driven by the three components that we talked about earlier, and then also weather, especially the wind. Wind is going to be one of the biggest edges in totals betting, and we'll get into this a little bit more later in the video. Um, Next, you're going to have player props. These are, your softer markets, and they're very matchup driven. So if you understand the data, there's definitely opportunity here, and it's becoming very, very popular. You've also got some futures. Futures are still alive. They got division winners, win totals, World Series, all those long term bets that you're thinking of. And then here's one of my favorites: it's first 5 innings. Now, remember, this removes the bullpen completely. and lets you focus strictly on starting pitching and offense. And I'll be honest with you, this is one that I personally like a lot because I've got a wife. I got 3 kids. I'm not trying to spend my entire summer breaking down every bullpen in baseball. So the first 5 innings lets me simplify the process and narrow down those 3 components into only 2. Now, one thing you need to understand before placing bets: action versus listed pitcher. So if you bet action with your bet, you will see this. You'll always see a drop down and it'll give you the option of action versus listed. Now, action just stands for that the bet will stand no matter what. No matter who starts, no matter who's in relief, it does not matter. That bet stands. Now, if you bet listed pitcher, both starters have to play. They have to throw pitches or the bet will be void. Now, here's the biggest takeaway from this entire slide: don't try to bet all types at once. You need to master one market, get good at it, then you can expand. I believe all the information in this video is important, but this might be the most important part of the entire video because the MLB is a long season and the variance, guys, is brutal. So you are going to lose, and you're going to lose in streaks. That's not necessarily bad luck, that's betting baseball. And if you don't accept that, you won't last long enough to win. So, when it comes to growing your bankroll, there are only going to be 3 ways to do this. The first one is going to be passive income, then it's making deposits, and then finally, it's winning. Let's go back to passive income. We've been preaching this throughout the longevity of the channel. Keep your bankroll in something like a high yield savings account. This is more for long term stability and growing your account even if you are losing. Remember, it's making a rate of return even when it's sitting idle. Next would be making deposits, and this should only be money that you've already budgeted from your personal finances. You're not chasing losses and you're not trying to get even. Then finally, we have a real one. It's going to be winning, and that's where having a real edge in executing over time will make you a profitable bettor. Now, to protect the bankroll, you're going to need some rules. And the rules are going to be max 5% on any single bet and max 15% exposure on a slate. That's going to protect you from one bad day or one bad stretch without completely wiping you out. Now, from there, it comes down to your style, right? Some of you guys are going to be a sniper that's taking 1 to 3 plays a day, with higher confidence and maybe even a bigger size. Or you might be a volume bettor where you're playing multiple smaller edges across the board. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here. You can be either one, but there is one rule that applies to everyone, and that's discipline. Because in a sport with this much volume, your edge is not going to matter as much as your bankroll. This is where you start thinking like a bettor and not necessarily a gambler. So you need to have your own line, not just looking at what the sportsbook is offering, but creating your own projection of what the line should be. And every bet usually comes down to comparing 3 things: the market line, the sharp line, and then finally your line. And the market line is what most sports books are dealing. You'll see this at books like DraftKings or FanDuel. Then you have the sharp line, which is, what the most respected sports books are showing, and you can find their lines at usually Pinnacle or Circa. Now, your line, it's basically your projection based on your research process that we talked about a few minutes ago. Now, this is where expected value comes in. If your line shows value compared to the market, that's a potential bet. If it doesn't, you usually pass. It's as simple as that. But then we have our second layer, which is close in line value, or CLV. Uh, are you consistently beating the closing number will be the question, because if you are, you're on the right side, especially in the long term. Now, here's where MLB is a little bit different though. Timing is going to matter. You're not just finding value, you're finding when to attack it. So pitchers get confirmed, the line moves. Lineups drop, usually a few hours before the game, but the line will move again. And one of the biggest edges in MLB is watching the sharp line. So if a sharp sports book starts moving toward your number and you still have potential value on the board, that's going to be a strong signal in your favor. So that's the market essentially agreeing with your position. And when you combine that positive EV and beating the closing line, that's when you act. And most of the time, you want to act fast. Now let's talk about the market analysis. This is where you start reading how the market is reacting and not just what you think. And if you want to do this right in MLB, you need to understand one key thing. Not every game is a public game. So for a game to actually qualify as a public game, you're looking at around 5,000 bets or more. If it's below that, there's not enough volume and the market analysis comes pretty much useless. So that's how it works. Remember the 5,000 bet rule. So, step one, you want to filter your games and make sure they have enough tickets so that you can move forward with market analysis. If there is not 5,000 bets on the event that you're handicapping, technicals or models, power ratings, maybe even some advanced stats mixed with the fundamentals will do just fine in finding an edge. But once a game has enough of a market and has over those 5,000 tickets, there are a few signals that you want to watch. And first, and this is a big one here in baseball, this is huge. Reverse line movement. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not taking notes, this better be at the fucking top of your list because this shows up in MLB more than any other sport. If the public is heavily on one side, but the line moves the opposite way, so I mean for the other team, that's telling you that sharp money is coming in on the other side. And that's a signal that you want to pay attention to. Next is going to be pitcher steam. Now, when respected money hits a starting pitcher early, you'll see that line move quickly. And then you've got some late information, right? You'll have the lineups dropping, there'll be scratches, there'll be last minute changes. Lines can move drastically from this information and in a short amount of time. Now, we're going to jump to the flip side though, and it's some of the common market overreactions, we'll call them. Think about aces getting overpriced because the public loves backing those big name pitchers, right? Also, the public loves streaks. They love teams on winning runs, maybe hitters on a hot streak. The market tends to overvalue those recent performances. Next would be like bullpen results, especially in the short term. Those can get overreacted to. And then, of course, you have those popular teams. Popular teams will always carry a premium. Now, here's going to be the key takeaway here with MLB. The market is softer, but it reacts instantly to pitching and lineup news, just like we've been saying throughout the video. So your edge isn't just identifying value, it's identifying it before the market fully adjusts to it. So that's where the timing becomes your edge. This right here is going to be your edge in baseball, and it's fundamental analysis. It all starts with the three core components. You've been hearing me like a broken record talk about these. It's going to be starting pitching, bullpens, and lineups. And if you are not accounting for these three, I can guarantee you one thing. You're going to lose in the long term at baseball. You need to know these core components. Now, we're talking about starting pitching is probably one of the most important pieces here. Who's going to be on the mound? What's their profile? What kind of outing are we expecting from them? Then we have the bullpen, right? Who's going to be available? Who's overworked and we will not see tonight? And who are the likely relief candidates coming into this game? Then finally, we have lineups. And this is where a lot of bettors get lazy, right? You want to look for run production, rest days, platoons, injuries, anything. Lineups gets changed almost every day. So these things are going to matter every single day in MLB. Now, once you lock in all those three components, that's when you're going to move on to the next level. And that's going to be matchups. You want to know lefty versus righty splits and also some pitch type matchups. How well does this lineup hit a fastball? What about a curveball? Does the pitcher rely heavily on something the lineup struggles with, or does he rely heavily on something that the offense will crush? You need to think of this like a process. Just think of it like this. You're betting the Red Sox versus the Yankees. The first question that you're going to have, who's starting? Then who's coming out of the bullpen? And what will the lineups look like? Once you have that, now you dig a little bit deeper, right? How do these lineups perform versus this pitcher's handedness? How do they perform versus this pitcher's mix? Does this pitcher or bullpen create problems for this specific lineup? That's how you start to build an edge. And remember, this can be applied to all bet types. Player props, for example. Let's say that you're handicapping a batter and you want to know if the starting pitcher he's facing, the potential bullpen candidates, and you're going to want to know how well those matchups both present themselves now and historically. Again, another reminder in baseball, data is dominant. So you can apply a stat basically to the majority of the questions that you're trying to ask here, and fundamental factors are going to be no different for the sport. You can apply a lot of data to fundamental factors. Now, let's layer in the next level. We're talking about the secondary and external factors. And it's important to separate these correctly because they're not weighted the same. We're going to start with secondary factors. These matter because they are I should say that they matter, but they're very very secondary. They should never outweigh your three core components that we talked about. But the first one is usually manager decisions. Managers are not going to mean much in baseball, but the bullpen usage, lineup adjustments, some of the situational tendencies, like steals, bunts, intentional walks, these are the things that you can kind of track, but they're not necessarily driving your edge. So just remember that. Then you got recent performance. You should track it, but please don't overvalue it because this is where a lot of bettors get trapped, right? Chasing hot teams, maybe they're chasing hot hitters. The minimum I like to use is those last 30 games. If you use a duration kind of shorter than that, like 15 or 7 games, I just don't feel that that's enough of a sample size to give you a full picture. And then you start falling into, the recency bias, the gambler's fallacy, and you don't want to do that. Same thing with schedule and travel. Think about the West Coast teams traveling East Coast teams traveling west. Maybe it's getaway games, weird spots. Yes, it does matter, but again, very, very small weight. Then we have motivation. Talk about playoff teams versus tanking teams maybe later in the year. Divisional underdogs, that can create upset, value throughout the whole season. That's useful as well. But again, this is layering. It's not the foundation. Your three core components are going to be, are going to tell the story first, not just these. Now let's go to the flip side, which is going to be the external factors. And these are a different conversation. These are almost as important as the core components, at least in my eyes, because they affect the environment of the game. First, it's weather, and specifically the wind. Wind is a game changer in baseball, especially for totals, right? The wind blowing out to the outfield, that means runs go up. If the wind is blowing into home plate, that means the runs dwindle. Then you've got ballparks. You can layer that as well. Every park plays differently, and that's where park factor comes in. So it's going to quantify how a stadium impacts scoring. Coors Field, that's an obvious example, right? High altitude, consistently high run environment. So you can expect a high park factor number for Coors Field. And then we have umpires, right? We have strike zones. They're going to matter. A tighter zone usually means more walks, more runs, obviously. And then you have wider zones. Those are more strikeouts, lower scoring. Now, here's where this becomes powerful, though. You have to kind of align these factors. And I'm talking about the external factors. For example, everyone sees Coors Field and thinks overs, 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 right? But what if the wind is blowing in and the umpire has a wide strike zone? Now you've got conflicting signals, and that's where value can actually show up in the other direction, like an under in a traditionally high scoring environment. So that's how you're going to think about this. And finally, how do you actually use all the fundamental factors, all of them together? Well, it's going to be a simple process for us. We like to back test, track, and then assign a value into our model. But always remember, core first and then layer the externals and mix in some secondary factors as the cherry on top. Now we get into the backbone of your process. We're talking about the technical analysis or your modeling. And I'm going to say this clearly. If you're using stats like batting average, you're already falling behind because in the Major League Baseball, you need stats that actually explain why performance is happening, not just what happened. And more importantly, these stats need to correlate with your bet type. So let's start with the money lines and the run lines. Who wins, or maybe even doing the margin. So let's start with pitching because it drives everything. We're talking about xFIP and xERA. These estimates or they estimate basically what a pitcher should be allowing. And they strip out that luck, defense, and randomness. Next is going to be whip. This is just walks plus hits per inning. How many base runners a pitcher allows. More base runners usually equals more scoring chances. Next will be strikeouts minus walk rate. This is going to be one of the best stats that you can use because it measures the dominance and control. A high number means a pitcher controls the game, where a low number means a pitcher puts too many balls in play or walks a little too many guys. Next would be hard hit percentage, maybe even OPS allowed and extra base hits percentage. These measure damage allowed. Remember, not all contact is equal, ladies and gentlemen. A pitcher giving up hard contact is dangerous even if the ERA looks good. Next, we have run expectancy. This measures how a pitcher impacts scoring based on situations. Now we're going to jump over to the hitting. We got WRC plus or RBAT plus. I want you guys to only pick one of these. These measure total offensive value. This is basically your, who has the better lineup stat. On base percentage is going to be another one that's pretty good. How often hitters get on base. More base runners usually equal what? More run opportunities. Now we got ROBA. Also, RE24, these measure quality of offense and run production, not just hits, but meaningful hits, right? Now, the big goal of modeling the MLB is going to be trying to eliminate luck. Stats like ERA can lie to you. So you're using advanced stats to find what's real, what's sustainable, and where the market might be wrong. Or if you want to get creative, you can even build a luck factor into your model. Now, let's move over to totals. This is where things kind of shift. Totals are about run environment, not just who wins. So start with pitching plus hitting stats that we just covered in the money line and run line. But now layer in wind. 10 miles per hour is what we like to look at. This is one of the biggest edges in baseball. Remember, wind blowing out means scoring boost up. Wind blowing in means that the scoring is suppressing. Park factor, this tells you how a stadium impacts scoring. Coors Field, high scoring environment, but a stadium like Petco Park, that's going to be suppressed runs. I would say check out Baseball Savant. They have a great park factor that considers multiple variables. And then don't just stop there. What if there are two great starters on the mound in Coors Field, with the wind blowing in? That may be value on the under in a notoriously overs bet stadium. Just remember that. Now, with the final thought here, modeling works in Major League Baseball because there's enough data, right? Enough volume. And then there's data and volume to build something real. But don't get this twisted. Your model is not, there to make all the decisions for you. It's there just to guide you. The edge is going to come from combining the core, the data, the fundamentals, and the market timing. That's how you're really going to win in the MLB. Now, let's finish this off by tying your data to the rest of the bet types. Because again, this is the whole point of the modeling, right? You want to use the right stats for the bet that you're actually placing. We're going to move on to player props. We zoom into the individual level, right? Strikeout props, like, you're thinking this is simple but really powerful, right? A pitcher strikeout rate versus opponent strikeout percentage, maybe a high strikeout pitcher versus a high strikeout lineup. You would want to, go towards the over in that player prop. Maybe a low strikeout pitcher versus a low strikeout lineup. You may go the under on that specific prop. Also thinking about hitting props, you're looking at contact ability plus the matchup. So does the hitter make consistent contact? Does the pitcher allow contact? And then you would jump into the historical matchups, right? But be careful here. This is where people kind of fall into the recency bias or maybe even the gambler's fallacy. Small sample sizes are going to crush you. So use it as only, a reference, not necessarily a decision maker. And finally, we'll touch on individual stats. You're diving into player level data. So you're talking about hard hit percentage, contact rates, pitch type performance. This is where props can get soft if you do it the right way. Now we're going to zoom out on a team level. We're going to talk about the futures. First and foremost, run differential. Some of you guys are going to say, this is a very elementary stat. Why would I look at that in terms of futures? Because run differential or scoring differential in baseball actually matters more than any other sport. You're going to want to account for it, basically. Um, then you're going to layer in some team pitching metrics, team batting metrics, team bullpen metrics. This is going to give you a full picture of team strength and then use the stats that we've been chatting about, but remember, on a team level. Or you can add up individual player values to make up a team level number. Final concept here that you need to understand, and you need to understand this if you want to win long term, is that era adjustments matter now more than ever. Sorry. The game is changing, right? Rules, pace, offense. So if you're using data from years ago without adjusting, you're modeling a different version of baseball. So make sure the stats that you use are actually impacting the betting market. And finally, remember, predictive stats are always going to be better than the traditional stats. ERA, it can lie. Underlying data like expected ERA or expected FIP, contact quality, that's what's going to tell you the truth. So that's how you use data the right way, not just usually collecting the stats, but applying them to the right bets. And if you want something that you can actually use day to day, we put together a simple system to identify what actually matters. It's a PDF that walks you through the exact technical, fundamental, and market factors that we just covered step by step. So instead of remembering all this, you can just follow the checklist and check it out down below. Now, let's talk about some systems, and this is where things can start to come together for you. A system is simply this. It's a repeatable pattern in the data that helps you make a clear, better decision. So, it's not a guarantee and it's not a lock, it's just a pattern that has shown value over time. So, for example, we have underdogs in divisional games over the last 10 years, ladies and gentlemen. The record is 4,685 wins to 6,110 losses. But guess what? It's still profitable, up over 59 units. That tells you something. Even though they lose more often, the price makes up for it. That's what a system is doing. It's identifying spots where the market might be slightly off. Now, here's the important part. You don't just blindly bet systems. You're going to use them as supporting evidence, something that strengthens a play you already like. And I'll tell you this, if you have a solid record keeper, these systems become way too easy. They almost build themselves because you're tracking everything, right? You're tracking your stats, your fundamentals, your results. And over time, patterns start to show up. And that's when you know you're doing the right thing. Not guessing, not chasing, but letting the data show you where that edge is. So, if you enjoy unbiased handicapping and real sports betting education, make sure that you subscribe to Grandstand Sports Data. That's all we focus on over here. Now we get into one of the most important tools that you can build, and that's power ratings. So this is your ability to assign a numerical value to the teams, maybe even pitchers and lineups. So you can create your own lines. Remember, we talked about that earlier. And in Major League Baseball, this is essential because every single game is a new equation. Now, let's walk through how this works. At the base level, you're starting with win percentage or run differential. Run differential is usually stronger because it's going to tell you how teams are actually performing, not just their record, how they're actually winning in terms of margin of victory. Then you're going to want to layer in those three components that we talked about throughout the presentation: starting pitching, bullpen, and lineups. Essentially, what you are trying to do is find a value number for each of these components and then have those three variables make up a team number. So once you can identify the starter, the potential relievers, and lineups for a matchup, then the advanced stats that you use will give you a number of each of the components, which will then create an equation to find a team number. You compare the two teams that are in the matchup, and the difference will be compared to the market to see if there is value. right? So remember, with power ratings, you always want to include fundamental factors and constantly update daily because MLB is a daily betting game. And let me make this very clear. No matter what you bet, you need power ratings. If you're betting money lines, if you're betting totals, if you're betting run lines, yes, even player props. Props too, ladies and gentlemen, because you still need to understand the strength of the pitcher, the strength of the lineup, and the environment of the game. So power ratings are essential in Major League Baseball because every game is its own equation. And if you can solve that equation better than the market, that's where your edge is going to come from. All right, now this right here is what's going to separate people from, who dabble in MLB betting from the people who actually do this seriously. Because MLB is not weekly, it's not even every few days, it is a daily grind. So let's walk through the process. In the morning, this is where you do your core work, right? You're updating your entire research process, fundamentals first, who's the starting pitcher, what are the bullpen options, what's the projected lineup. Then you're going to jump to your technicals, update your power ratings, update your models. And this is where you're going to find the early edges. So if your numbers are strong, this is actually one of the best times to bet, especially if you're consistently beating the closing line. Now we'll jump to the afternoon or maybe right after you do the morning analysis. This is when you shift to the market. You're tracking the movement, right? And in Major League Baseball, we've already told you this is huge. Reverse line movement, sharp action. This is where you can really see where money is going. You're also monitoring pitching status, right? Because one pitching change can flip the entire game. Now we want to jump to the pregame. And this is your final check, right? Lineups get confirmed about 2 to 3 hours before first pitch. And this is critical because now you have the actual version of the game, not the projections, but the reality. And you're going to want to reassess, is there still an edge? And if yes, maybe I'll place that bet. And I'll be honest with you guys, this process isn't for everyone. If you've got a busy schedule, we're talking family, kids, this can be it can be excruciating to keep up with every single day. And that's why personally one adjustment that I make, and I talked about this earlier, is betting the first 5 innings because now instead of breaking down starting pitching, bullpen, and lineup, I'm cutting it down to only starting pitching and lineup. So there's 2 components instead of 3, less time, more focus, and still plenty of opportunity. And that's the key with Major League Baseball. It's not just what you know, it's how consistently you can apply the process. All right, now let's talk about the stuff that actually kills most bettors. Not bad picks, not bad models, and it's going to be the obstacles. First, the sportsbook's built in edge. They have sharp information, ladies and gentlemen. They're seeing action from the best bettors in the world. They know their record. They can identify sharp info from a mile away. Also, we've talked about this throughout the video, speed. The lines move instantly, especially if you're talking about pitching or lineup changes. Next is going to be market size. MLB money lines are a big market, so you got tons of games, tons of money, and this is going to make it efficient. So what does that mean for you? You're not beating the book by being casual. You're going to need some structure, you're going to need some discipline, and you're obviously going to need a real process. Now, let's talk about the bigger problems. It's going to be you, right? Don't chase losses. You lose few bets and now you're doubling down, right? We've seen this. You lose like 3, 4, and now you're like, oh, I need to get it back. You're forcing plays. That's how bankrolls disappear, ladies and gentlemen. The solution for this is going to be stick to your unit sizing. We told you this before. Anything in between 1 to 5% and never over 15% in one slate, and you're only placing plus EV bets, no exceptions. Next is going to be, and this is important, especially in baseball, overreacting to your own results. You go 2-8, and suddenly your system doesn't work, or you go 8-2, and you think that you're unstoppable. Both are dangerous. You have to trust your sample sizes and not your emotions. So, the last one's obviously going to be narrative betting. he's due or they always win here. This team owns this team. That's not necessarily analysis, ladies and gentlemen. That's storytelling. And this isn't Disney World. So the solution here is if it's not backed by data, it kind of doesn't matter. And here's the truth, right? You're going to hit losing streaks in Major League Baseball. There's no question about it. There's 162 games for each team. There's daily variance, bullpen chaos. It's going to come, right? The only question is, can you survive the losing streaks? Because those streaks are the most common reasons why baseball bettors jump ship. Can you imagine going through a 15-game losing streak while at Six Flags swimming in the wave pool with a sausage just stuffed down your throat? It's horrible, but it comes with MLB betting. As long as you stick to the plan and place those plus EV bets, you will have just as much winning streaks as you have losing ones. Now, I'm curious from you guys, what's your biggest struggle with betting Major League Baseball right now? I want you guys to drop it down in the comments. I read all of them and I'll respond to a few of them. Now, let's keep it going because these right here are the ones that quietly destroy bettors over time. The first one's going to be discipline, right? The discipline obstacles. We're talking about over betting the board. There's 10 to 15 games a day, and the temptation is to bet everything. That's going to be a mistake. The solution here is going to be selective. You don't need action, you just need plus EV. That's it. Next is going to be not line shopping. In this, listen, if you were to rank some of the, I would say, second layer variables in baseball, I would say number one is reverse line movement and always look at it. And then the second one is odd shopping. If you're not odd shopping in baseball, you're losing money. It's huge in Major League Baseball. Think about if you're betting minus 120s versus minus 130s. That difference adds up over a season, and it adds up quick because of the sample size. So always have multiple sports books and always try to get the best number. Next will be abandoning the plan. You start disciplined, then the losing streak hits, and now you're changing everything. That's how you lose long term, not just in baseball, in everything. So stick to your system. Adjust with the data, not the emotion. The last one, and this one really gets me, it's not tracking. Well, I'm not going to say it doesn't get me, but it really pisses me off when people don't do it. You have to track, ladies and gentlemen. You don't know what's working if you don't track. You don't know what's not working if you don't track. You're basically just guessing. The solution from me, to give you the advice, track everything. I want to say close to 80% of the MLB strategies that I use is from analyzing my own record keeper. Next, we're going to move on to the analytical traps, right? We're talking about recency bias. You're reacting to the last game, maybe the last series, instead of the full picture. The solution, zoom out. Trust those larger sample size all the time. Trust those larger samples. Next will be confirmation bias, right? You find a play, then only look for reasons to support it. Don't do that. Always argue both sides of a bet. I would say it's kind of like your preliminary handicapping. It shouldn't be a problem if you're doing modeling and everything else. So I would say that it's low down the list, but just be cognizant of it. Gambless fallacies is the next one. You've lost 5 in a row, and now we think that we're due. No, each game is independent. Base everything off of probabilities and not winning streaks or losing streaks. Overvaluing small sample size is going to be the next one, right? A guy has 2 good starts and now he's elite. That's just way too dangerous for my liking. I need you guys to use meaningful sample sizes before adjusting ratings. And then the last one might be kind of the most important one. We've talked about it throughout. It's not accepting losing. So even elite bettors are hitting around 55%, and that means that they're losing about 45% of the time. That's a lot. And I'll say this clearly. This idea of accepting losing, it shows up everywhere in this game. New bettors, they can't handle it. That's the number one problem with MLB betting. It's going to be the variance for you. You're going to lose. You're going to have bad beats, bullpen chaos, randomness, losing streaks. It's part of baseball. The difference is, do you accept it and stay disciplined, or do you fight it and destroy your bankroll? Because in Major League Baseball, survival with your bankroll is going to be everything. Now, let's close this out with something that most bettors overlook: continuing education. Because in MLB, if you're not learning, you're falling behind. Analytics are everything in this sport. And the crazy part is they're evolving fast, faster than almost any other sport. So if you're not keeping up, you're already behind the market. I would start with some core sites: Fangraphs, Baseball Savant, Baseball Reference. These are your foundation. This is where you learn what stats actually matter, how to interpret them, and how to apply them into your modeling. Now, here's a huge edge in Major League Baseball: beat writers and team pages. Why, you might ask? This is where you get your real time information. Remember those three components that we've been talking about: starting pitcher, bullpen, lineups? This is where you track them daily. And I'll be honest, Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, is where the news breaks. So if you're not there, you're going to be late. So you should also be paying attention to the final one. Well, I shouldn't say the final one, but weather tools. Weather tools are going to be huge here. Wind, temperature, ballpark conditions, they're going to matter in baseball more than you think. Now let's move on to some of your tools. You're talking about Excel, Python, even R here. This is how you build, track, and improve your process. I will say people still can get away with a yellow pad as long as you're doing the right things, you're tracking the right systems, and you're also tracking the right stats. You can use Excel and Python. It will work. It will help. Finally, though, if you want to take this a little bit more serious, you're going to need data. So sites like Sports Art History is going to allow you to go back and test some ideas and actually validate some of the things that work, because that's what basically this comes down to, right? Not opinions, not guesses, but you need some actual proof. And I'll leave you with this: if you think continuing to educate yourself in MLB is not necessarily important, if you're not improving, you're falling behind. So if this guide kind of helped you at all and you want to support the channel, you can always use Super Thanks. Super Thanks down below. Think of it as buying us a coffee. It's totally optional, but if you love the research and the effort that we put into these videos, those Super Thanks will always be appreciated. All right, that's your full MLB betting guide. And if you got value from this, want more MLB education, hit that like button. If you're into unbiased handicapping and real sports betting education, make sure you subscribe to our channel. And I'm curious, what's your biggest challenge when betting MLB right now? Drop it in the comments section down below. If this guide helped you and you want to support the channel, you can always use Super Thanks. Think of it as buying us a coffee. It will always be greatly appreciated. And if you want something you can actually use every day, check out our What Actually Matters in MLB Betting checklist. It walks you step by step through the exact factors that we covered down below. We appreciate you guys for watching. And like always, we'll see you in the next one.